In the quiet hours before sunrise, when the city was still wrapped in a soft blue darkness and the streets outside were mostly silent, Al Roker often found himself sitting at the kitchen table with a warm mug of coffee, reflecting on the stories that had filled the news the night before. For decades, viewers had welcomed Al into their homes with familiarity and affection, seeing him as the warm, reassuring face who helped them start each day. Yet, even in the calm rhythm of morning television, Al understood that the news carried deeper emotional currents, stories of conflict, loss, and human endurance that lingered long after the broadcast ended. In recent years, he had been thinking more about colleagues like Tom Lamas, journalists who reported directly from the world's most dangerous places, standing in the middle of conflict zones to bring truth back to the rest of the world. Al admired that courage deeply. He knew that when reporters like Tom appeared on screen, describing distant battles or humanitarian crises, viewers saw only a composed professional delivering facts. What they rarely saw was the invisible emotional toll that came with witnessing such suffering up close. Al often imagined the quiet moments those reporters experienced once the cameras shut off, the long nights in unfamiliar hotel rooms, the echo of distant explosions, the memory of faces they had met along the way. Journalism, at its best, carried the responsibility of bearing witness, but bearing witness also meant carrying stories that never fully left the mind. As Al grew older, this realization touched him more deeply than it once had. Audiences in their 60s and beyond understood that life's hardest lessons often arrived not in dramatic moments, but in the quiet reflections that followed them. Al's wife, Deborah Roberts, understood this emotional landscape well. As an accomplished journalist herself, she had spent years telling powerful stories around the world, and she knew that reporters often absorbed the pain of the events they covered. There were evenings when Deborah and Al would sit together in their living room after a long day of broadcasting, the television turned low while they talked about the deeper meaning behind the headlines. Deborah sometimes spoke about the resilience she had witnessed in people living through hardship, reminding Al that even the darkest stories often revealed remarkable strength. Those conversations became a kind of grounding ritual for them. They reminded Al that while journalism exposed the world's struggles, it also revealed humanity's quiet courage. Thinking about Tom Lamas and other field correspondents made Al appreciate the emotional discipline required to step into dangerous places and still communicate with clarity and empathy. It required more than bravery, it required an ability to process suffering without letting it harden the heart. For viewers who had lived through decades of historical events, wars, crises, and social change, that idea resonated deeply. They understood that resilience was not simply about enduring difficulty, but about maintaining compassion even when confronted with the harshest realities. Al sometimes shared these reflections with younger journalists who passed through the studio, reminding them that the role of a reporter was not just to gather information, but to honor the humanity within every story. Deborah often added her own wisdom during those discussions, emphasizing that journalists needed to care for their emotional well-being just as carefully as they prepared their reports. Over the years, Al had come to believe that the most effective journalists were the ones who balanced courage with reflection. They stepped into challenging situations, but they also allowed themselves the time to process what they had seen. That balance helped preserve the empathy that made their storytelling meaningful. For audiences in their 60s, many of whom had spent a lifetime balancing responsibility with emotional growth, this perspective felt familiar. Life had taught them that strength did not mean ignoring pain, it meant learning how to carry it thoughtfully. As dawn slowly brightened the sky outside Al's window, Al finished his coffee and prepared for another day in the studio. Soon he would step under the warm glow of the cameras, smiling as he greeted viewers with the friendly ease they had come to expect. Yet behind that smile lived a deeper awareness of the world's complexity, an understanding shaped by years of listening to stories from journalists like Tom Lamas who stood closer to history's hardest moments. Al knew that while he might not stand in those conflict zones himself, he still shared in the responsibility of helping viewers understand them. That responsibility required compassion, perspective, and a quiet respect for the reporters who carried the world's most difficult stories home. Before leaving the house, Deborah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and offered the same reassuring smile that had accompanied him through so many years of broadcasting. It was a simple gesture, but one that reminded him of the balance that made everything possible, the ability to face the world's challenges while staying anchored in the warmth of home. For the viewers who would soon watch him on their television screens, many of whom had spent a lifetime following his career, Al's steady presence represented something comforting. It reflected a lifetime of learning that even in a world filled with difficult news, kindness, reflection, and shared understanding could help carry the weight of those stories forward. And so, as the morning broadcast began and the familiar rhythm of the show unfolded, Al Roker spoke with the same warmth and steadiness that viewers trusted, knowing that behind every headline was a deeper human story, and that honoring those stories with empathy was the quiet responsibility shared by every journalist who chose to tell them.